Hey guys, tonight we slip into the flickering gaslight of Victorian England, where sleep was a battlefield and insomnia a cunning foe. Picture yourself in a creaky four-poster bed, the air heavy with lavender and coal dust, your nightcap itching against your scalp. The clock ticks past midnight, but your eyes refuse to close. Victorians like you right now were obsessed with conquering sleeplessness, and their cures were as elaborate as a Dickens novel, often just as peculiar. You probably won't survive a night in their world of opium drops and hypnotic stares, but let's try anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying in a chilly London townhouse, 1860s, the kind with drafty windows and wallpaper that smells faintly of arsenic. Insomnia wasn't just a personal gripe. It was a cultural epidemic. The Industrial Revolution had folks working brutal hours, their nerves frayed by steam engines' clatter and the newfangled pressure of time management. Charles Dickens himself complained of sleepless nights, pacing London's streets until dawn. Mainstream history tells us the era's doctors blamed insomnia on nervous exhaustion, a catch-all for minds overwhelmed by progress. But here's the quirky bit. Some Victorians swore their sleeplessness came from moonlight poisoning, believing lunar rays sneaking through curtains could jangle the brain. No kidding. They'd board up windows like they were fending off vampires. You toss and turn, wondering why sleep feels so elusive. Historians still argue whether urban noise or psychological stress was the bigger culprit. Cities like Manchester roared with factory din, while rural folks weren't much better off, kept awake by superstitions about night spirits. Either way, Victorians didn't just accept sleeplessness, they fought it with a bizarre arsenal. You continues the narrative about the tools and tactics Victorians used. Your hand brushes a bottle of laudanum on the nightstand, a mix of opium and alcohol, peddled as a sleep aid. You'd hesitate to try it, but plenty didn't. Pharmacies sold it like candy, and poets like Coleridge swore by its dreamy haze. But it's not just drugs. You're surrounded by rituals. A maid might have left a sachet of hops under your pillow, a folk remedy said to coax dreams. You chuckle at the thought. Hops like in beer? Yet Victorians took it seriously, blending science and superstition in their quest for rest. You sit up, restless, and notice a book. The Art of Sleeping, a popular guide. Its advice: avoid heavy suppers, keep feet warm, and, get this, rub your scalp with vinegar. You smirk, imagining the smell. But these books sold thousands, proof of a society desperate for shut-eye. The middle class, especially, saw sleep as a status symbol. Only the idle rich could afford to doze past dawn. If you're yawning already, good. Victorians would envy you. As you pull the quilt higher, you hear the street below. A night watchman's boots, a drunk's slurred song. No wonder sleep was tough. You're tempted to try that vinegar trick, but instead, you wonder what else these folks did. Spoiler, it gets weirder. From magnetized pillows to chanting mesmerists, the Victorian insomnia fight was a circus of hope and hustle. And you're about to step right into it. You're still in that creaky Victorian townhouse, the gaslight casting long shadows across your bedroom's floral wallpaper. The air's thick with the scent of wax candles and that odd lavender sachet under your pillow. sleep's nowhere in sight. So you're about to dive into the nightly rituals Victorians swore would usher them to dreamland. These weren't just habits, they were elaborate performances, half science, half superstition, designed to tame the restless mind. Picture yourself sitting up in bed, the quilt slipping off your shoulders. Mainstream history notes that Victorians were obsessed with bedchamber hygiene. Doctors like William Banting, a celebrity physician of the 1860s, insisted a proper bedroom setup was key to sleep. You'd need a firm mattress, none of those soft modern ones, stuffed with horsehair or wool. Your windows stay cracked open even in January because night air was thought to purify the lungs. You shiver just thinking about it. But here's the quirky twist. Some folks believed sleeping with your head pointed north aligned you with Earth's magnetic field, supposedly calming your nerves. No compass, no sleep apparently. You glance around, noticing the bedside table cluttered with sleep aids. There's a tiny glass of warm milk, laced with a pinch of nutmeg. Victorians loved this combo, claiming it settled the stomach. You take a sip and wince. It's cloying, but you're desperate. Historians still argue whether these rituals worked or just gave people a placebo's comfort. The placebo effect was barely understood then, but it likely powered half these cures. Now let's get to the bedtime routine itself. You'd start hours before, because Victorians didn't just hop into bed. First, you'd prepare the body. That means a foot bath, ideally with mustard powder, to draw out nervous energy. You smirk, imagining the mess on your floorboards. Then comes the nightgown, long, scratchy, and buttoned to the chin. Men and women alike wore these, often with a nightcap to keep the head warm. You tug yours on, feeling like a ghost at a Christmas pageant. Next, you dim the lights, carefully, since gas lamps could spit sparks. Some wealthier homes had sleep candles, specially made to burn low and slow, casting a hypnotic glow. You watch the flame flicker, wondering if it's working. Spoiler, it's not. So you try the next step, mental preparation. Victorian manuals urged you to empty the mind through prayer or reciting poetry. You mutter a few lines of Tennyson, but your brain's still buzzing. Here's where it gets weirder. Some folks practiced bed positioning. You'd shift your body, left side, then right, then stomach, based on pseudo-scientific charts, claiming each pose aided digestion or blood flow. You try it, flopping awkwardly, and nearly knock over the milk glass. It's ridiculous, but thousands followed these guides, sold in bookshops alongside novels and almanacs. You're not alone in this ritual madness. Across London, Manchester, and even rural villages, people perform these steps like a sacred dance. The middle class, especially, saw bedtime as a moral act. Good sleep meant discipline. Bad sleep signaled weakness. You chuckle, thinking how your late-night scrolling would have horrified them. But there's a charm to their earnestness, a reminder of a world before melatonin gummies and white noise apps. As you settle back, something catches your eye. A small bottle labeled Dr. Collins' soothing syrup. It's probably opium-based, and you're not touching it. Not yet. But its presence hints at the next step in this insomnia saga. Victorians didn't just rely on rituals. They turned to drugs, tonics, and downright quackery to chase sleep. You're about to find out just how wild that got. But for now, you adjust your nightcap and wonder if that mustard foot bath was such a bad idea. You're still nestled in that drafty Victorian bedroom, the horsehair mattress creaking beneath you as you shift, chasing sleep that refuses to come. The nutmeg-laced milk on your nightstand has gone cold, and that north-facing head position, total bust. Now, your gaze lands on that suspicious bottle of Dr. Collins' soothing syrup, glinting in the candlelight. It's opium, of course, the Victorian go-to for silencing a restless mind. Let's drift into the hazy world of opium-based sleep aids and how they became a bedtime staple. Mainstream history confirms opium was everywhere in the 19th century. Apothecaries sold it as laudanum, a bitter, alcoholic tincture, or in pills, powders, even candies. Doctors prescribed it for everything from toothaches to female troubles, but insomnia was its star role. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the poet, downed laudanum to quiet his racing thoughts, producing dreamy works like Kubla Khan. You're tempted to try a drop, imagining yourself floating into a poetic stupor. But here's the quirky catch. Some Victorians mixed their laudanum with absinthe, believing the green fairy amplified its sleep powers. Spoiler, it mostly amplified hangovers. You unscrew the bottle, sniffing its sharp medicinal tang. A single drop on your tongue could send you to dreamland, or a nightmare. Historians still argue whether opium's popularity was driven by genuine insomnia or a cultural addiction to escapism. Industrial life was brutal. Factories ran 14-hour shifts, and urban noise never stopped. Laudanum offered a quick exit, but at a cost. Overdoses were common, and withdrawal turned users into jittery wrecks. Let's step back and picture the scene. You're not alone in this opium haze. Across Victorian England, men and women, rich and poor, kept bottles by their beds. Housewives stirred it into tea. Laborers swigged it after shifts. Even children got dosed. Products like Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup promised to hush crying babies. You wince, thinking of the consequences. It's no joke, but there's a grim humor in how casually they peddled this stuff, like selling Red Bull today. Now, imagine you resist the laudanum's pull. You're curious about how it's used. Some Victorians followed strict rituals, measuring drops with a glass pipette, diluting it in water to avoid overdreaming. Others were less cautious, gulping it straight and waking up, or not, in a fog. You smirk, picturing a posh gentleman misjudging his dose and snoring through a business meeting. It happened more than you'd think. But opium wasn't just a drug. It was a cultural obsession. Novels of the era, like Wilkie Collins's The Moonstone, wove laudanum into their plots, hinting at its grip on society. You wonder if those authors were users themselves, scribbling by candlelight in the narcotic days. The stuff was cheap, too. Cheaper than gin for most of the century, making it a poor man's escape from sleepless nights. Here's where it gets weirder. Some fringe practitioners claimed opium could tune your dreams, letting you choose adventures before nodding off. You'd sip your dose, focus on, say, a tropical island, and supposedly wake refreshed from a mental vacation. You try it, closing your eyes and picturing a sunny beach. Nope, just the same creaky bedroom. Still, the idea's oddly charming, like a proto-lucid dream in hack. As you set the bottle down, you notice the label's fine print. For sleeplessness, melancholy, and nervous agitation. That last bit sticks with you. Victorians saw insomnia as more than a physical problem. It was a sign of a disordered soul. Opium promised to fix both body and mind, but it often broke them instead. You're glad you didn't take that sip. The next step in this insomnia fight involves less risky remedies, though no less bizarre. Picture patent medicines, bottled promises sold by slick salesmen. You're about to meet them. You're back in that chilly Victorian bedroom, the laudanum bottle safely capped on your nightstand. The candles burning low, casting jittery shadows on the arsenic-laced wallpaper. Sleep still playing hard to get, so you're about to dive into the wild world of patent medicines. Those bottled miracles hawked by smooth-talking charlatans. Victorians gulped these concoctions like they were the elixir of life, hoping to cure their insomnia with promises as bold as a circus barker's pitch. Mainstream history tells us patent medicines were a 19th century phenomenon, exploding with the rise of newspapers and advertising. By the 1870s, brands like Dr. Pierce's Golden Medical Discovery or Ayer's Cherry Pectoral filled apothecary shelves, each claiming to fix everything from coughs to sleeplessness. You spot a bottle labeled Lydia Pinkham's Vegetable Compound on your table, its label boasting restful slumber for nervous minds. It's mostly alcohol with a dash of herbs, but Victorians swore by it. You're skeptical, sniffing its syrupy scent. Smells like a boozy dessert. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some of these medicines included cocaine, marketed as a gentle stimulant to ease you into sleep. Yes, cocaine. You chuckle, imagining a wired Victorian tossing and turning faster after a dose. Products like coca wine promised calm, but often left users buzzing like a telegraph wire. Historians still argue whether these remedies helped or just hooked people on new vices. The lack of regulation meant anything could be bottled and sold. No FDA to rain on the parade. Picture yourself browsing a chemist's shop, shelves groaning with colorful vials. There's chlorodyne, a mix of chloroform and morphine, and Baddeley's sedative solution, another opium knockoff. You pick up a bottle of Dr. Seth Arnold's cough killer, which oddly claims to double as a sleep aid. The label's fine print is a riot. For wakefulness, take with a lump of sugar. You smirk. Sugar's probably the only safe ingredient. These medicines weren't just bought, they were cultural icons. Advertisements filled magazines showing rosy-cheeked women smiling post-dose, or stern doctors endorsing nerve tonics. You imagine a salesman in a top hat, charming a crowd with tales of miracle cures from the Orient. It's half scam, half theater, and Victorians ate it up. The middle class especially loved the idea of a scientific fix for their frazzled nerves. You're tempted to try the vegetable compound, but the 40% alcohol content makes you pause. Now, let's get weirder. Some patent medicines leaned on outright lunacy. Dr. Williams's pink pills for pale people claimed to recharge the blood, somehow aiding sleep. Others, like Vin Mariani, mixed cocaine with red wine and promised dreams of vigor. You laugh, picturing a posh dinner party where guests sip cocaine wine and debate sleep cures. It's absurd, but these products banked millions, preying on a sleepless society. You set the bottle down, noticing a faded ad tucked under it, a glowing testimonial from a Mrs. E.B. Birmingham claiming Pinkham's potion saved her nights. You're not convinced. The real kicker. Many of these cures were placebos at best, addictive at worst. Yet, they shaped Victorian bedtime routines, with families passing bottles around like heirlooms. You recall that mustard foot bath from earlier, and wonder if it was saner than these tonics. As you lean back, the bed creaks, and you hear a distant street vendor hawking soothing balms. The patent medicine craze was peak Victorian hustle. Hope in a bottle, sold to a world too tired to question it. You're glad you skipped the cocaine wine, but curiosity's got you now. What's next? Picture shadowy figures waving magnets and chanting spells. Hypnotism's calling, and it's about to get delightfully strange. You're still sprawled in that creaky Victorian bed, the candle now a stub, its faint glow barely pushing back the shadows. The bottle of Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound sits untouched. Good call, considering its boozy kick. Sleep's still dodging you, and the street outside hums with late-night vendors, their cries fading into the fog. Now, you're about to step into the mesmerizing world of hypnotism, where Victorians turned to trance-inducing showmen to chase their elusive dreams. Mainstream history pegs hypnotism as a 19th century craze, rooted in the work of Franz Mesmer, whose animal magnetism theories sparked a frenzy. By the 1860s, mesmerists were all the rage in London and beyond, promising to soothe insomnia with hypnotic stares and waved hands. You picture a bearded man in a tailcoat, his eyes locked on yours, urging you to sink into slumber. It's theatrical, but thousands swore it worked. You're curious, sitting up straighter, ready to be mesmerized. Here's the quirky bit. Some hypnotists claimed they could magnetize your bed itself, infusing it with sleep-inducing vibes. They'd wave magnets over your mattress or sprinkle it with vitalized water. Basically tap water with a fancy name. You smirk, imagining the sales pitch. Buy my magnetized pillow for 10 shillings and dream like a lord. Historians still argue whether these sessions were psychological tricks or pure placebo. The mind's power over sleep was barely understood, but mesmerists cashed in on the mystery. Let's set the scene. You're in a dimly lit parlor, velvet curtains drawn, a small crowd watching as the mesmerist begins. He's got a pocket watch swinging like a pendulum, his voice low and rhythmic. Your eyelids grow heavy. You try to focus, but the watch's glint is distracting. Victorian records describe patients falling into trances, some snoring on the spot, others babbling about visions. You're not sure if you doze off or just giggle. The process wasn't cheap. A single session could cost a week's wages for a clerk, yet parlors stayed packed. Mesmerists like John Elliotson, a respected doctor, lent the practice credibility, claiming it calmed nervous agitation. But it wasn't all science. You hear whispers of fringe performers who'd hypnotize entire families, promising to align their dream cycles. You chuckle, picturing a household snoring in sync like a bizarre choir. It's absurd, but the era's desperation for sleep made anything seem plausible. Now, imagine you're game to try it. The mesmerist leans closer, his fingers tracing circles in the air. You're supposed to visualize a calm lake or a drifting cloud. Standard hypnotic imagery even today. But Victorian hypnotists loved flair. One might tell you to float among the stars or merge with the ether. You try it, closing your eyes, but the bed's creaks keep pulling you back. Still, there's a strange calm in the ritual, like a bedtime story for grown-ups. Here's where it gets weirder. Some mesmerists offered distance hypnotism, claiming they could send sleep vibes across miles via mental telegraphy. You'd pay for a scheduled trance, lie in bed at 11 p.m., and wait for the magic to hit. You laugh, imagining yourself staring at the ceiling, wondering if the signal got lost. Yet, letters from the era show people swearing it worked. Probably just the power of suggestion. As you lean back, the mesmerist's voice fades in your mind. Hypnotism was part medicine, part circus, but it tapped into a real need. Victorians weren't just sleepless. They were fascinated by the mind's hidden powers. You recall that laudanum bottle from earlier and figure this is safer, if weirder. The next step in this insomnia saga involves dusty guidebooks filled with sleep advice, some practical, some downright loony. You're about to crack one open. You're still in that drafty Victorian bedroom. The mesmerists swinging watch a fading memory as you sink back into the horsehair mattress. The candle's gone out, leaving you in near darkness, save for a sliver of moonlight sneaking past the curtains. Sleep's still a distant hope, and the memory of that cocaine-laced sleep tonic makes you wary of more bottles. Now, you reach for a leather-bound book on your nightstand, its title embossed in gold. The Art of Repose. Victorian sleep manuals like this were bedtime Bibles, packed with advice ranging from sensible to downright unhinged. Let's flip through their pages. Mainstream history shows these guidebooks were wildly popular, especially in the 1860s and 70s, when nervous disorders like insomnia gripped the middle class. Authors like Dr. William Hammond, a neurologist, penned bestsellers urging readers to master sleep through discipline. You open the book, its pages musty, and find a chapter on preparing the mind for repose. It suggests reading dull sermons before bed. Ironic, since this book's dense prose could knock you out. You smirk, wondering if that's the point. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some manuals recommended thought drainage, where you'd write down every worry on a slate, then wipe it clean to erase anxiety. Picture yourself scribbling, forgot to pay the coal bill, and that weird foot bath smell, then swiping the slate blank. It's oddly satisfying, like a 19th century to-do list purge. Historians still argue whether these rituals calmed the mind or just distracted it. The placebo effect was at play, but nobody called it that yet. Let's dive into the advice. The book's first tip: keep your bedroom at exactly 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Any warmer, and you'd overheat the brain. You glance at the open window, letting in a February chill, and pull the quilt tighter. Next, it suggests sleeping on your right side to aid the heart's rhythm. You try it, but the mattress creaks like a ship in a storm. The manual's adamant about diet too. No spicy suppers, no tea after 4 p.m., and absolutely no pickles. You chuckle, imagining a pickle-induced nightmare. Victorians were weirdly specific. Now, it gets stranger. One chapter advises scalp friction, where you rub your head with a flannel soaked in vinegar to stimulate sleep currents. You wince at the smell, recalling that mustard foot bath from earlier. Why were Victorians so obsessed with pungent cures? The book claims it redirects nervous energy, but you suspect it just distracts you from counting ceiling cracks. You give it a pass, flip into a section on mental exercises. It suggests reciting the alphabet backward or picturing sheep jumping a hedge, one at a time. No rushing. You try the sheep thing, but they keep morphing into grumpy cows. So much for that. These manuals weren't just for the elite. Priced at $1, they reached clerks, governesses, even factory workers. They fed a cultural obsession with self-improvement. Good sleep meant a productive life, and Victorians loved productivity. You notice a dog-eared page with a reader's note. Tried the vinegar. Regret. You laugh, feeling a kinship with this long-gone insomniac. It's comforting in a way, knowing you're not alone in this sleepless slog. Here's the wildest bit. Some guides suggested sleep proxies, where you'd hire someone to sleep in your bed first to warm the sheets and absorb ill humors. You picture a hired snoozer, paid a penny to nap in your place and snort at the absurdity. Yet, in grand country houses it wasn't unheard of. Wealthy Victorians had staff for everything, so why not sleep? As you close the book, its weight thumps against the nightstand. These manuals were earnest, sometimes silly, but they show a society grappling with rest in a noisy, changing world. You recall the mesmerist's trance and wonder if a dull sermon might actually work. But the next chapter of this insomnia fight involves gadgets. Mechanical, clunky, and wonderfully bizarre. You're about to meet the Victorian sleep machine. You're still tossing in that lumpy Victorian bed. The moonlight now a faint glow as clouds smother the sky. The sleep manual's vinegar-soaked advice sits heavy in your mind, and you're half tempted to recite the alphabet backward just to bore yourself unconscious. But something else catches your eye, a strange contraption in the corner. All brass gears and leather straps, looking like a cross between a clock and a torture device. Welcome to the world of Victorian bedroom gadgets, where inventors promised mechanical miracles to lull you into slumber. Mainstream history highlights the 19th century boom in consumer technology, with inventors churning out devices for every ailment, insomnia included. By the 1870s, catalogs brimmed with sleep aids like vibrating pillows and foot-warming contraptions, marketed to a sleepless middle class. You approach the device, a patent slumber inducer, its label boasts, and notice a crank handle. Turn it, and it hums softly, supposedly emitting soothing oscillations. You give it a spin, but it squeaks like a rusty gate. So much for high tech. Here's the quirky gem. Some gadgets used electrotherapy, delivering mild shocks to rebalance your nerves. Picture a box with wires and a hand-cranked battery, zapping your temples to induce repose. You laugh, imagining the sales pitch. A jolt tonight keeps insomnia out of sight. Historians still argue whether these devices worked or just startled users into exhaustion. Early electricity was a mystery, and Victorians slapped it on everything, from toothaches to baldness. Let's explore this slumber inducer. Its manual, yes, it comes with one, claims it mimics the rhythm of a mother's heartbeat. You crank again and it clatters, more like a broken music box. Still, you're intrigued. The device has a padded headrest, meant to vibrate gently against your skull. You try it, lying awkwardly, but the buzzing feels like a bee trapped in your nightcap. Victorian adverts swore by these, with testimonials from Mr. J.S. Leeds claiming instant sleep. You're not sold. Now, picture the broader scene. Wealthier homes boasted foot warmers, copper pans filled with hot coals slid under the sheets. You wince, recalling that open window letting in the chill. There were also sleep chairs, recliners with adjustable angles to optimize blood flow. You spot one across the room, its velvet worn thin. It looks comfy, but the manual warns against over-reclining, lest you disrupt your vital energies. You roll your eyes. Victorians loved their vague science. Here's where it gets wilder. Some gadgets were downright steampunk. The Lunar Dream projector used a gas-powered lamp to cast flickering patterns on the ceiling, mimicking stars to hypnotize the retina. You imagine lying back, watching blurry constellations, and chuckle at the fire hazard. These devices weren't cheap. A good one cost a month's rent for a clerk, yet they flew off shelves. The era's obsession with progress made any gadget seem like a sleep savior. You abandon the slumber inducer, its hum fading to a whimper. But you're curious about other oddities. Some bedrooms had weighted blankets, not like today's cozy versions, but heavy sacks filled with sand, meant to press out restlessness. You picture yourself pinned under one, gasping for air, and decide to stick with the quilt. Another device, the oral soother, played tinny lullabies via a wind-up cylinder. You wish you had one now. Anything to drown out the street's drunken ballads. These gadgets reveal a society desperate for control. Between factory noise and social pressures, Victorians saw sleep as a puzzle to solve with gears and sparks. You recall that mesmerist's pendulum and wonder if it was less risky than a rogue shock box. The next step in this insomnia odyssey involves soothing drinks, not the opium-laced ones, but herbal brews and tonics. You're about to brew a cup and hope it's not another vinegar-level letdown. You're still restless in that Victorian bedroom, the slumber inducer's squeaky hum now silent in the corner. The moonlight's gone, swallowed by clouds, and the room's so dark you can barely make out the quilt's pattern. That sleep manual's thought drainage trick didn't work. Your slate's still cluttered with worries about coal bills and creaky mattresses. Now, your nose catches a faint whiff of chamomile from a steaming pot on a side table. Victorians loved their bedtime brews, from herbal teas to strange tonics, all sworn to coax sleep. Let's pour a cup and see what's brewing. Mainstream history notes that tea culture exploded in 19th century Britain, with herbal infusions marketed as health aids. By the 1860s, apothecaries and grocers sold sleep teas, blending chamomile, valerian, and lavender, often with grandiose names like Dr. Mortimer's Repose Blend. You lift the pot's lid, inhaling its floral steam, and pour a cup. It's warm, slightly bitter, but soothing. Victorians drank these nightly, believing herbs could calm the animal spirits. You sip, hoping they're right. Here's the quirky twist. Some tonics included toad flax, a weed thought to purge restless humors. You check the pot's label. Yep, toad flax is listed, alongside something called betony. You chuckle, picturing a chemist tossing weeds into a cauldron like a medieval witch. Historians still argue whether these brews worked or just tasted awful enough to distract from insomnia. Herbalism was half science, half folklore, and Victorians gulped it down eagerly. Picture the ritual. You're sitting up, the cup's heat warming your hands. A proper Victorian would have brewed this hours ago, letting it steep to release the virtues. The process was fussy. Strain through muslin, add a drop of honey, never sugar. Sugar was deemed too stimulating. You follow suit, skipping the honey since the jar's empty. The tea's not bad, but you're not drifting off yet. Manuals from the era, like that art of repose you skimmed, urge drinking it slowly, savoring each sip to quiet the mind. You try, but your mind's still replaying that electrotherapy gadget's buzz. These brews weren't just for homes. Tea shops and health parlors served sleep tonics, especially in London, where stressed clerks and factory workers sipped them after work. Some tonics were spiked with alcohol. Brandy was a favorite, blurring the line between tea and nightcap. You smirk, recalling that cocaine wine from the patent medicine days. At least this chamomile's safer, though you're starting to suspect Victorians just like drinking weird stuff. Now, let's get weirder. Some recipes called for lunar infusion, where herbs were steeped under moonlight to absorb celestial calm. You glance at the cloudy sky and laugh. Good luck with that tonight. Fringe herbalists claimed the moon's phase mattered. Full moon for strong brews, new moon for gentle ones. You imagine a grocer whispering, "This Valerian's prime, picked at the gibbous." It's nonsense, but it sold jars by the thousands, especially to women who were told their delicate nerves needed extra soothing. You set the cup down, noticing a faint stain on the saucer. Someone's been at this before you. These rituals were communal, with families brewing giant pots to share. Cookbooks from the era, like Mrs. Beeton's, included tea recipes alongside puddings, proof of their domestic clout. You feel a pang of nostalgia for that mustard footbath. At least it didn't require a moonlit harvest. As the tea cools, you reflect on its place in the Victorian sleep arsenal. It's less risky than laudanum, less shocking than electrotherapy, but no silver bullet. The era's obsession with natural cures shows a longing for simplicity amid industrial chaos. You recall that mesmerist's starry visions and wonder if a second cup might help. But the next chapter of this sleepless saga involves actual booze. Nightcaps with a Victorian twist. You're about to pour something stronger. You're still in that dim Victorian bedroom, the chamomile tea's warmth fading in your cup as you slump against the headboard. The pot's empty, and sleep still dodging you like a pickpocket in a London alley. The room's quiet now, save for the occasional creak of floorboards settling in the night. Your eyes drift to a decanter on the nightstand, its amber liquid glinting faintly. Victorians loved their boozy nightcaps, not just for cheer, but as a sleep aid with a kick. Let's pour a glass and explore these tipsy remedies. Mainstream history confirms alcohol was a staple in 19th century Britain, with spirits like brandy and whiskey flowing freely. By the 1860s, doctors like Thomas Inman endorsed a small cordial before bed to steady the nerves. You uncork the decanter, brandy naturally, and pour a modest splash. Its sharp, fruity scent fills the air, promising warmth. Victorians saw these drinks as medicinal, not indulgent. A nightcap was as routine as brushing your teeth. You sip, wincing at the burn, and wonder if sleep's finally on its way. Here's the quirky bit. Some nightcaps included possets, hot milk mixed with ale and spices, believed to coat the stomach for rest. Picture yourself heating milk over a candle, stirring in nutmeg and a slosh of beer. You laugh, imagining the curdled mess, hardly a recipe for sweet dreams. Historians still argue whether these drinks helped sleep or just blurred the edges of a restless night. Alcohol's sedative effect was real, but tolerance built fast, leaving users chasing bigger doses. Let's set the scene. You're cradling the brandy glass, its weight comforting. A proper Victorian nightcap wasn't gulped. You'd sip it slowly, maybe in a velvet dressing gown, feeling briefly aristocratic. Manuals like The Art of Repose suggested specific drinks: brandy for men, sherry for women, and mulled wine for delicate constitutions. You smirk, recalling that toadflax tea. Booze feels more straightforward. But there were rules. No more than 2 ounces, or you'd inflame the passions and stay awake. You stick to one, just to be safe. These drinks weren't just solo affairs. In grand homes, families gathered for a bedtime toddy, passing around a punch bowl spiked with rum or gin. You imagine a parlor scene, a grandmother muttering about humors, a cousin overpouring the rum. It's cozy, but the hangover risk was real. Taverns also got in on the game, serving sleep drafts to workers who'd carry flasks home. You picture a factory hand sipping gin under a gas lamp, hoping for a few hours rest. Now it gets weirder. Some fringe recipes added laudanum to the mix, creating a double sedative cocktail. You eye the brandy warily, grateful it's untainted, unlike that opium syrup from earlier. These spiked nightcaps were sold as cordial balms, with names like Dr. Gregory's Night Elixir. You chuckle, picturing a quack doctor bottling gin and opium, claiming it restores the soul. It's no wonder overdoses were common. The line between medicine and vice was blurry. You take another sip, the brandy's warmth spreading. It's pleasant, but you're not drowsy yet. Records from the era show mixed results. Some swore by their nightly whiskey. Others woke groggy, cursing the cure. Temperance advocates railed against boozy remedies, arguing they led to moral decay. You smirk, thinking how your late-night energy drink habit would have scandalized them. Still, there's charm in the ritual, a nod to a time when a glass felt like defiance against a sleepless world. As you set the glass down, the decanter's crystal catches a flicker of light. Nightcaps were less about getting drunk and more about hope, a liquid prayer for rest. You recall that vibrating slumber inducer and figure this is less noisy, if riskier. The next step in this insomnia fight dives into the Victorian psyche, where sleep wasn't just physical, but a moral battle. You're about to uncover why they thought sleeplessness was a sin. You're still propped up in that creaky Victorian bed, the brandy's faint burn lingering on your tongue as you set the glass aside. The room's pitch dark now, the clouds snuffing out any hope of moonlight, and the air's grown colder, seeping through that ever-open window. Sleep's still a tease, and the memory of that posset recipe, milk and ale really, makes you grimace. Now you're about to dive into the Victorian psyche, where insomnia wasn't just a nuisance but a moral failing, tied to virtue, sin, and societal pressure. Let's unpack why they thought a sleepless night meant you were doing life wrong. Mainstream history shows that Victorians were obsessed with self-discipline, a byproduct of industrial efficiency and evangelical fervor. Sleep was seen as a moral act, proof of a well-ordered soul. Preachers like Charles Spurgeon sermonized that idleness breeds wakefulness, urging folks to tire their bodies through honest work. You shift under the quilt, feeling oddly judged for lying here, restless. The era's magazines, like the Leisure Hour, ran articles linking good sleep to godliness. Bad sleepers, they implied, were flirting with vice. You smirk, wondering what they'd say about your late-night doom-scrolling. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Victorians believed insomnia stemmed from overthinking sinful thoughts. Pamphlets warned that dwelling on envy, lust, or, get this, novels could agitate the brain past midnight. You laugh, picturing a stern vicar confiscating your copy of Jane Eyre to save your sleep. Historians still argue whether this moral panic was religious dogma or a way to control a stressed-out populace. With factories and social climbing keeping folks wired, blaming sin was an easy out. Picture yourself flipping through one of those pamphlets, its title screaming, "The Dangers of Wakefulness." It's less about sleep tips and more about soul scrubbing. Pray for an hour, confess your faults, avoid exciting music. You try muttering a prayer, but the bed's creaks distract you. The advice feels like a lecture, not a lullaby. Yet these ideas shaped bedtime across England. Families knelt for nightly prayers, hoping piety would unlock slumber. You imagine a household chanting psalms, their nightcaps bobbing in unison. Cozy but a bit cultish. This moral angle wasn't just talk. Doctors reinforced it, diagnosing insomnia as spiritual dyspepsia, a fancy term for a guilty conscience. You recall that laudanum bottle and wonder if it was less sinful than staying awake. The middle class especially felt the pressure. Sleep signaled productivity, and productivity was next to godliness. You chuckle, thinking how your all-nighter would have branded you a moral wreck. Now it gets weirder. Some fringe preachers claim demons caused insomnia, prowling bedrooms to stir the wicked. They sold holy pillows stuffed with blessed herbs to ward off these night fiends. You glance at your pillow, half expecting a whiff of sacred sage. It's just musty feathers, but the idea is wild. Pay a shilling, and your pillow's a demon shield. These scams thrived in rural areas where folklore still held sway. You picture a farmer tucking in, clutching his holy pillow like a talisman. The pressure wasn't just spiritual, it was social. Neighbors gossiped about who rose early versus who lays till noon. You feel a pang of sympathy for those bleary-eyed Victorians, judged for something they couldn't control. Diaries from the era, like those of Governess Anne Bronte, describe sleepless nights as a personal shame, hidden from employers. You relate, recalling nights spent staring at your ceiling, feeling like you've failed some unspoken test. As you pull the quilt higher, the room's silence feels heavy, almost accusatory. This moral lens on sleep explains why Victorians tried everything, brandy, prayers, even toadflax tea, to prove their virtue. You think back to that mesmerist's trance and wonder if it felt less judgmental. The next chapter of this insomnia saga zeroes in on women whose sleep struggles came with extra baggage. You're about to see how gender twisted the cure game. You're still tangled in that Victorian bed, the quilt now a crumpled heap as you shift restlessly. The brandy's glow has faded, and that pamphlet about sinful thoughts keeping you awake feels like a personal jab. The room's so dark you can barely see the nightstand, but the chill from that open window keeps you sharp. Now you're diving into the peculiar world of women's sleep struggles, where Victorian gender norms turned insomnia into a gendered puzzle, with cures as restrictive as a corset. Let's see how the ladies navigated this sleepless maze. Mainstream history confirms that Victorian women faced unique pressures, with medical texts like those by Dr. Edward Tilt labeling them naturally prone to nervous disorders, including insomnia. The era's obsession with delicate femininity meant women's sleeplessness was often blamed on their biology. Think hysteria or weak nerves. You imagine a doctor peering over his spectacles, prescribing rest for your overwrought constitution. You roll your eyes, but back then, this was gospel. Women were urged to avoid mental strain, like reading novels or, heaven forbid, debating politics, lest it rob them of sleep. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some cures involved lunar bathing, where women sat in moonlight to rebalance their cycles and invite slumber. Picture yourself dragging a chair to the window, hoping the clouds part for a lunar fix. It's poetic but absurd, tied to myths about women's tidal natures. Historians still argue whether these remedies were empowering or just another way to infantilize women. Moonlight won't cure insomnia, but it gave women a ritual to claim as their own. Let's set the scene. You're a Victorian woman, maybe a governess or a merchant's wife, lying in this creaky bed. Your day was endless, sewing, managing servants, or teaching unruly kids, all while laced into a suffocating corset. No wonder sleep's elusive. Doctors prescribed feminine tonics, like that Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound you eyed earlier, packed with alcohol and herbs to soothe the womb. You sniff the bottle again, its boozy whiff tempting, but you know it's no miracle. These tonics were marketed heavily to women, with ads showing serene ladies smiling post-dose. The cures didn't stop at tonics. Manuals urged women to cultivate passivity before bed, think embroidery or reciting hymns, never anything stimulating like chess. You smirk, imagining yourself stitching a sampler while yawning. Some fringe remedies were wilder, like wearing magnetic corsets to align vital energies. You picture the contraption, steel stays and magnets, promising sleep, but probably just pinching your ribs. These were sold in women's magazines, alongside ads for complexion creams, proof that insomnia was a gendered business opportunity. Now, it gets weirder. Some doctors claimed women's insomnia stemmed from repressed passions, urging marriage as a cure, because apparently, a husband fixed everything. You laugh, recalling that holy pillow scam. At least it didn't require a wedding. Unmarried women, especially spinsters, were pitied as naturally wakeful, their single status a medical flaw. Diaries from the era, like those of poet Christina Rossetti, hint at sleepless nights spent wrestling with societal expectations, not just biology. You feel the weight of those norms, even now. Women's bedrooms were sanctuaries, but also cages, filled with lavender sachets and impossible rules. You recall that toad flax tea, and wonder if men had to choke down such brews. The double standard's clear. Men got brandy and electrotherapy. Women got moonlight and moral lectures. Yet some women pushed back, brewing their own herbal remedies or sneaking forbidden novels under the covers, defying the passive ideal. As you adjust your nightcap, the bed creaks, echoing the strain of those gendered cures. Women's insomnia wasn't just physical. It was a symptom of a world that demanded they be everything: poised, pious, asleep, without complaint. You think back to that mesmerist's trance and wonder if women found freedom in its fleeting escape. The next step in this saga takes you to doctors' offices, where diagnoses got even stranger. You're about to meet the sleep experts. You're still restless in that Victorian bedroom. The corset-tight rules for women's sleep lingering in your mind as you tug the quilt higher. The room's a void of darkness now. The windows draft sharper, carrying the faint clatter of a passing carriage. That lunar bathing nonsense for ladies sounds like a chilly waste of time, and you're grateful to move on. Now, you're stepping into the stuffy offices of Victorian doctors, whose diagnoses for insomnia were as dubious as a patent medicine label. Let's see what these experts prescribe to tame your sleepless nights. Mainstream history shows that Victorian medicine was a mix of emerging science and wild guesswork, with insomnia often misdiagnosed as everything from brain fever to moral weakness. Physicians like Sir James Clark, who treated Queen Victoria, wrote treatises on nervous exhaustion, blaming sleeplessness on overwork or irregular habits. You picture yourself in a doctor's office, all mahogany and cigar smoke, explaining your wakeful nights. He'd scribble a prescription for restorative rest, which sounds like a cruel tautology. You sigh, already dreading the bill. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some doctors prescribed a change of air, sending patients to seaside towns or mountain retreats to purify the nerves. Picture yourself bundled in a shawl, inhaling salty Brighton breezes, hoping the waves lull you to sleep. It's less bizarre than toad flax tea, but no cheaper. Only the wealthy could afford a sleepcation. Historians still argue whether these trips worked or just offered a break from urban chaos. Fresh air is nice, but it doesn't fix a racing mind. Let's set the scene. You're perched on a hard chair, the doctor peering at you through a monocle. He asks about your diet, your dreams, even your reading habits, too many novels, and he'll blame overstimulated fancy. His diagnosis? Neurasthenia, a catch-all for nervous woes, including insomnia. The cure? A regimen of bed rest, bland food, and, here's the kicker, no thinking. You smirk, wondering how you're supposed to turn off your brain. This rest cure was famously prescribed to women, like writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who later skewered it in her story The Yellow Wallpaper. The prescriptions get weirder. Some doctors ordered hydrotherapy, where you'd be dunked in cold baths or wrapped in wet sheets to shock your system into sleep. You wince, recalling that mustard foot bath. Wet sheets sound even worse. Others pushed bromide potions, sedatives that left you groggy for days. You spot a vial on the doctor's desk, labeled potassium bromide, and decide it's not for you. These remedies were mainstream, advertised in medical journals, but their side effects often outdid the insomnia itself. Now it gets downright odd. Fringe practitioners claimed insomnia came from blocked cranial fluids, recommending skull massages, or even trepanning, drilling holes in the head to release pressure. You laugh, picturing a quack with a drill, promising sweet dreams. Thankfully, trepanning was rare, but the fact it is even suggested shows how desperate the era was for answers. You'd rather stick with that brandy nightcap, hangover and all. Doctors weren't just prescribing, they were gatekeepers of morality. A sleepless patient might be lectured on excessive ambition or improper leisure. You feel a twinge of defiance, recalling those women forced into passivity. The doctor's notebook lists your symptoms, palpitations, irritability, and suggests a daily dose of calmative syrup, likely another opium mix. You decline, remembering that laudanum haze from earlier. These visits were costly, often $1 per consult, and rarely solved the problem. As you leave the imaginary office, the doctor's voice echoes, "Rest and avoid excitement." Easy for him to say. Victorian medicine was a maze of half-truths, with insomnia as its minotaur, elusive and misunderstood. You think back to that vibrating slumber inducer and wonder if it was less patronizing. The next chapter of this sleepless journey takes you to early sleep clinics, where science and ritual collided. You're about to check in for a strange stay. You're back in that creaky Victorian bedroom. The doctor's smug, avoid excitement advice still ringing in your ears as you flop onto the mattress. The room's colder now. The window's draft carrying a whiff of coal smoke from the street. That bromide potion sounded like a one-way ticket to a foggy brain, and you're done with quack diagnoses. Now, you're checking into the strange world of early sleep clinics, where Victorians sought rest in purpose-built sanctuaries blending science, ritual, and a touch of spa-like fantasy. Let's take a tour. Mainstream history notes that by the late 1870s, rest cures evolved into specialized retreats, especially in Europe. Places like Dr. Edward Binns' Sleep Sanatorium in Yorkshire offered structured programs for the sleepless elite. You imagine arriving at a stone manor, its ivy-clad walls promising peace. The cost was steep. A week's stay rivaled a month's rent, but for the wealthy, it was a status symbol. You trudge up the sanatorium steps, clutching a valise, hoping for a miracle. Here's the quirky bit. Some clinics used sound baths, where patients lay in darkened rooms as attendants played gongs or tuning forks to harmonize the nerves. Picture yourself on a cot, a bronze gong humming nearby, its vibrations oddly soothing. You smirk, thinking it's like a proto-ASMR session. Victorians were onto something. Historians still argue whether these clinics worked or just offered a pricey escape from daily stress. The placebo effect likely did heavy lifting, but the pampering didn't hurt. Let's explore the routine. You're ushered into a candlelit ward, its walls draped in calming green velvet. The air smells of lavender and carbolic soap, a nod to the era's hygiene obsession. The clinic's rules are strict. No visitors, no books, no talking after 8 p.m. You're given a linen gown and a schedule. Breakfast at 7, airing in the garden, then hours of enforced rest. It feels like a posh prison, but you comply, sinking into a chair by a window overlooking misty moors. The treatments are eclectic. Mornings start with tepid baths, where you soak in lukewarm water laced with Epsom salts to draw out agitation. You try it, the water sloshing as you stifle a yawn. Not from sleepiness, but boredom. Afternoons bring gentle massage, with attendants kneading your shoulders to loosen nervous knots. It's pleasant, but you recall that skull massage nonsense and wonder if this is any better. Evenings feature those sound baths, the gong's drone competing with your growling stomach. Meals here are bland, all porridge and broth. Now, it gets weirder. Some clinics offered dream diaries, where you'd scribble your nightmares for a sleep physician to analyze. You jot down a dream about a giant laudanum bottle chasing you, chuckling at the absurdity. Fringe doctors claim these diaries revealed psychic blockages, but most just use them to justify longer stays. You imagine a quack squinting at your scrawl, prescribing an extra gong session. It's a racket, but the era's fascination with the mind made it plausible. These clinics weren't just for the rich. Charity wards existed, though they were grimmer. Think crowded dorms, not velvet drapes. Women especially flocked to these places, escaping the gendered pressures you explored earlier. You spot a fellow patient, a governess, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. You swap a knowing glance, both trapped in this odd experiment. Records from the time, like those of neurologist Silas Weir Mitchell, show mixed results. Some left refreshed, others just broke. As you settle into your cot, the gong's hum fades. These sanctuaries were a bold stab at solving insomnia, blending science with the era's love of ritual. You think back to that brandy nightcap and wonder if it was less hassle. The next step in this saga dives into folklore, where old wives' tales promised sleep with a whisper. You're about to chant some bedtime charms. You're back in that drafty Victorian bedroom, the sanatorium's gong still faintly echoing in your mind as you sink into the familiar creak of the horsehair mattress. The clinic's velvet-draped calm was nice, but its price tag and porridge diet sent you packing. The room's dark, the windows chill now a familiar nuisance, and sleep's still playing coy. Now, you're diving into the whispering world of Victorian folklore, where old wives' tales and bedtime charms promise to lure slumber with nothing but words and superstition. Let's murmur some spells. Mainstream history shows that folklore thrived in 19th century Britain, especially in rural areas, despite the era's industrial march. Books like Notes and Queries cataloged charms passed down through generations, many aimed at insomnia. You clutch a tattered almanac, its pages brittle, filled with rhymes to bind the night. One charm instructs you to whisper, "Moon and stars, send dreams afar," 3 times while touching your pillow. You try it, feeling silly but oddly soothed by the rhythm. These rituals were common, especially among servants and farmers who couldn't afford laudanum or clinics. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some charms required dream tokens, small objects like a pebble or feather placed under the bed to anchor sleep. You rummage under the mattress and find a dried lavender sprig, likely left by a previous tenant. It's no feather, but you tuck it back, hoping it's charmed. Historians still argue whether these rituals worked or just gave comfort through repetition. In a world of clanging factories, a whispered rhyme was a free escape. You're still nestled in that creaky Victorian bedroom, the almanac's whispered charms fading into the chilly air as you settle deeper into the quilt. The window's draft carries a distant dog's bark, but the room feels softer now. Those folklore rhymes weaving a faint spell of calm. Sleep's still elusive, yet you're ready to reflect on how these bizarre Victorian insomnia cures. Opium, gongs, moonlight, echo in our modern quest for rest. Let's drift from 1860s London to today, tying this sleepless saga together. Mainstream history shows that Victorian sleep fixes, flawed as they were, laid groundwork for modern sleep science. The era's rest cures and clinics foreshadowed today's sleep labs, where electrodes track brainwaves instead of gongs. You picture yourself back in that Yorkshire sanatorium, then fast forward to a modern clinic. Its sterile hum not so different. The Victorians' obsession with nervous exhaustion mirrors our diagnoses of stress-induced insomnia, though we swap laudanum for melatonin. You smile, grateful for safer options, but wonder if we've traded one hustle for another. Here's the quirky bit. Some Victorian remedies, like weighted blankets, have made a comeback. Those sand-filled sacks you scoffed at, they're now trendy, backed by studies on deep pressure stimulation. You tug the quilt tighter, imagining it's a high-tech version, and chuckle. Victorians would have bragged about their therapeutic sacks. Historians still argue whether these old cures were pure placebo or tapped into real psychology. The lavender sachet under your pillow feels like a nod to both worlds. It sent a bridge across centuries. Let's reflect. You've tried it all. Brandy nightcaps, vibrating gadgets, even backward walking charms. Each was a stab at control in a chaotic world. Victorians faced factory noise and social pressure. You've got screens and deadlines. The parallels striking. Both eras fetishize productivity, then scramble for rest. You recall that moral panic over sleeplessness, how it branded you as sinner. Today, we're gentler, but the guilt lingers. Every sleep hack it implies you're failing if you're awake at 2 a.m. The Victorian arsenal was wild. Cocaine wine, holy pillows, lunar teas. But it showed human grit. You admire their creativity, even if you'd never touch that toad flax brew again. Modern fixes aren't perfect either. Pills can addict, apps can stress. You think back to that mesmerist's pendulum and wonder if mindfulness apps are just digital trances. The core problem persists. Sleep can't be forced, only invited. Victorians learned that the hard way, and you're learning it now, one restless night at a time. Now, it gets weirder. Some fringe Victorian ideas, like thought drainage slates, prefigure journaling apps that prompt you to dump your worries. You imagine swiping an app instead of wiping a slout, the glow keeping you awake. Yet, there's wisdom in both. Clear the mind, ease the body. You see echoes of those dream diaries in sleep-tracking wearables, quantifying what folklore left to sprites. The Victorian faith in ritual, from salt at the threshold to north-facing beds, lives on in our bedtime routines, whether it's a fan's hum or a guided meditation. As you lie back, the bed's creaks feel like old friends. This journey through Victorian insomnia, its tonics, its moralizing, its charms, shows a universal truth. We're all chasing the same fleeting peace. You're not so different from that governess with her holy pillow or the clerk sipping bromide. Their world was louder, smellier, but the longing's the same. You close your eyes, picture in that lavender sprig, and hope it's working its magic. Now, let's ease you towards sleep, wherever you are. Maybe a cozy apartment in Chicago, a quiet cottage in Devon, or a bustling flat in Tokyo. The Victorian bedroom fades, its creaks and drafts dissolving into a gentle hum, like a distant tide. Picture a soft meadow, grass swaying under a twilight sky, stars winking awake one by one. Each breath you take is slower, deeper, carrying away the day's weight. Those emails, that to-do list, all drifting like dandelion seeds. The air's cool, scented with earth and dew, wrapping you in a calm as old as time. You're safe here, no need to chase sleep. It's already curling around you, soft as a whisper. Let your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts blur into mist. The world can wait. For now, there's just this moment, this quiet, this peace. Sleep well, dreamer.